he returned. But he wasn't the same. At the airport, family members awaited him with flowers, flags, and tears in their eyes. But the man who stepped off the plane had a lost look in his eyes, his posture rigid, his face closed. Tight hugs didn't elicit a smile. Not even his son, who ran into his arms, could bring back that glow everyone remembered. Anyone who lived through war understands. Sometimes the battle continues, even after the last shot. He carried with him an invisible enemy, one that left no marks on the body, but bled from within. The sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor, a gate slamming, the smell of smoke in the air, all of these could bring him back to the front in a fraction of a second. And that's how, even far from the war, he never stopped being part of it. The first night home was a piercing silence. At dinner, eyes searched for some story, some detail of what he'd experienced. But the words seemed trapped, and when they came, they were dry, hard, as if each sentence were a weight. The family realized that the man who left with the easy smile now withdrew even in the simplest moments. The sound of laughter seemed distant, and human touch almost unbearable. The war had taken much more than friends and colleagues. It had taken the ability to feel peace, and no one was prepared for that. He would wake up in the early hours, sweaty, panting, as if he'd just run miles under fire. The mattress was damp with sweat, his chest heaving rapidly. Sometimes he'd sit for hours on the edge of the bed, staring into space, while his wife pretended to sleep, trying not to cry. Other times he'd get up and pace the house, checking doors and windows, as if he were in hostile territory. And to him he was. His smile, once part of his identity, had become a mechanical effort. At family gatherings, he tried to participate, but his gaze always wandered off into the distance, as if searching for something or someone that would never return. Friends said, "He's changed." But no one knew for sure what the war had done to him, only he knew. And, deep down, perhaps he would prefer it if no one knew, because explaining the pain doesn't make it less sometimes, it makes it more real. It was the beginning of a long internal exile, a prison without bars, without walls, but with daily sentences, the impossibility of ever being who he was again. And deep down, he was already beginning to wonder if this man, the one from the past, still existed. Before he lost his smile, he lost other things. He lost the right to choose where to go, the comfort of a safe home, and the illusion that war was something distant. It all began with a seemingly simple calling, to serve his country. At that moment, he believed he was protecting something greater than himself. He was young, strong, and full of conviction. Newspapers carried headlines about attacks and threats, and military propaganda painted the war as a struggle between good and evil. But no one said that, in the field, there were no heroes, only survivors. The months of training were tough, but his mind was still intact. It was like a game of physical and mental endurance, as if it were all a test that would end with applause. But reality began to set in on the very first mission. There was no epic music, no victory speeches. There was only silence, smoke, and the irregular sound of gunfire coming from all sides. It was on that first night that he understood. War doesn't wait for you to prepare. It simply happens, and swallows everything. The conflict that brought him there had deep roots. Territorial disputes, economic interests, and old historical wounds transformed ordinary men into soldiers, while politicians traded accusations and figures were negotiated in secret meetings. He and his comrades were on the front lines, trying not to die up with each passing day. It became clearer that war wasn't just about ideals, it was about power. And power always has a price paid in blood. In letters home, he wrote little, not because he had nothing to tell, but because he didn't want his family to know the truth. He told them he was fine, that everything was under control, but the reality was different. Sleepless nights, rationed food, biting cold, and the constant weight of carrying a rifle. He learned quickly that in war there is no room for weakness, and that every second of distraction could be his last. And so, day after day, he molded himself into chaos. His identity, once made of happy memories, was replaced by images of explosions, screams, and bodies on the ground. There was no longer yesterday or tomorrow, only now, and now was survival. If you're watching this far, it's because you sense this story is more than a war story, it's a warning. So take this opportunity to like and subscribe, because in the next few minutes you'll see how the war doesn't end when the soldier returns home. It continues, just changing battlefields. His present is a minefield. There are no sirens, there are no orders. There are birthdays where a balloon pops and his body instinctively falls to the ground. There are Sunday lunches where the smell of burning flesh makes him close his eyes and swallow hard. There are supermarket lines that turn into trenches when someone raises their voice. Those watching from the outside think it's an exaggeration. Those who live inside feel their heart race and their hands tremble. It's easy to judge when the danger doesn't dwell within. He tries to hide it. He smiles from the corner of his eye. He says everything is fine, but the body doesn't lie. The body remembers. And when the body remembers, the ordinary day becomes a battle. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to cross the city with an enemy inside your head? The house has become a tactical map. His chair has to be against the wall. The bed needs to face the door. The curtains are closed. The television is barely muted. Footsteps in the hallway need to be rhythmic. Any change sets off invisible alarms. His wife has learned to speak softly. His son has learned not to sneak up behind them. They live the choreography of domestic survival. It's not drama, it's protocol. His room has a backpack packed, water, a flashlight, medicine, documents, old habits of those who know chaos, a routine that avoids triggers. And yet the triggers go off, because the trigger isn't the outside world. The trigger is what the war left inside. At work, he tries to fit in, but the open space feels like an exposed foundation. People come and go without warning. Phones ring constantly. Loud laughter pierces his chest like warnings. He searches for the nearest exit. He maps the clocks. He counts windows. He turns his back to no one. He faces everything. At the slightest metallic sound, his gaze darts for cover. The boss calls for a chat. He can't explain that the problem isn't attitude. It's a symptom. Those who measure productivity don't understand sleepless nights. Those who demand targets don't see daytime ghosts. Until the cold warning comes. Restructuring, misalignment. He returns home with an envelope in his hand, and the feeling of losing. Another war that no one sees. The city pays dearly for the wars it didn't choose. Hospitals overflowing with people in pain that doesn't show up on x-rays. Clinics overflowing with postponed appointments. Support groups in makeshift rooms on the outskirts. The stories repeat themselves under different names. A former soldier who can't get on a bus. A mother who can't tolerate fireworks because of her son. A neighbor who's turned to drinking to sleep. The trauma map crosses neighborhoods. It reaches the school, the church, the bar on the corner. When a war breaks out far away, you might not even hear the gunshots, but you'll feel the bill arriving silently. In the price of medicine. In the separation from a colleague. In the absence of a father when he's present yet distant. There are other victims who don't wear uniforms. The woman who wakes up in the middle of the night to the scream beside her and holds his hand until his wrist relaxes. The child who draws tanks without knowing why. The grandfather who doesn't understand how a strong grandson is afraid of fireworks. They live the post-period without medals. They attend school meetings. They seek therapists. They learn to talk about trauma without shame. They are silent heroes. They hold the house together while he tries to hold his head together. They also wear themselves out. They lose sleep. They lose friends. They lose their lightness. Someone asks if they're going to the movies. They answer maybe. Because maybe is the shield of those who never know when the next trigger will appear. And meanwhile, politics uses stories as ammunition. On one side, promises of care. On the other, flags, waved to commemorate sacrifices. On the stages, applause. In small rooms, vials counted. He told me in one of those off-camera conversations, I don't need speeches. I need routine. I need a job that accepts my bad days. I need treatment that doesn't require proof of war. At every appointment, I need to not be treated as dangerous. I need to not be treated as weak. It's a simple request. It's a huge request, because it requires society to trade labels for listening. And listening takes work. The world feels the shocks of the front lines in other ways too. Refugees crossing borders with light suitcases and heavy memories. Cities welcoming those fleeing and discovering that welcoming is more than opening doors. It's opening up time. It's opening up budgets. It's opening up patience. Markets tremble with news of pipeline attacks. Gasoline prices rise. Shipping costs rise. Food prices change on the shelf. You didn't hear a shot, but you paid the bill at the pump. Someone comments that it's far, but far has never been so close. A conflict burns wheat where you've never walked and changes your breakfast. It's fair. It's inevitable. Or is it just another reminder that war has long arms? There are numbers that are cutting. The number of people with insomnia grows. The use of sedatives grows. The feeling of alertness grows in quiet neighborhoods. And loneliness also grows. Because there's shame in admitting that one's head can't take it. There's fear of losing ones. Job, there's fear of scaring away loved ones. So many keep quiet they distance themselves. They become functional shadows. They pay bills, respond to short messages. They avoid invitations. Isolation becomes a transparent wall. You see the person. They see no way out. This is what happens when the noise from outside stops and the noise from inside continues. Who goes there and knocks on this wall? Who has the courage to say, I'm staying here? There are paths. They aren't magical. They're slow. They're persistent. Therapy that respects the pace. Groups that transform shame into words. Rites that become practice, not promises. Work that fills the day with purpose, not pressure. Neighborhoods that learn signs and offer safe companionship. Schools that welcome children and don't mark them. Churches that make room for fragility. The state that guarantees medicine and doesn't wait in line. When this happens, the present still hurts. But it hurts less. And when it hurts less, the smile doesn't return as before. It returns differently. Shorter, rarer, more valuable. A smile that doesn't deny the past. A smile that says, I'm still here, and tomorrow could be worse if we pretend nothing is happening, or it could be a little better if we choose to care. In the next section, we'll look at this crossroads. What is the cost of doing nothing? What is the risk of continuing to sweep this pain under the rug? And what can happen when leaders choose noise over healing? Are you ready to see the risk map that surrounds us? So breathe, because now we walk towards the edge of the abyss, and try not to fall. If nothing changes, tomorrow becomes a repetition of alarms. The soldier returns, but the city remains unprepared to welcome him. He tries to live a normal day, and finds closed doors, overcrowded services, empty promises. The system pushes him to the margins. When the margins fill, violence grows. Frustration turns to anger. Anger turns to abandonment. This is how we create more tense streets, more fragile families, and children who grow up learning to fear the sound of a door slamming. And what if it's their door? And what if it's their family? What happens when the pain we ignore decides to collect with interest? There are risks that don't fit in the news. The first is silence. Without care, isolation becomes the norm. People abandon treatment and look for quick solutions. Alcohol, pills, sleepless nights with the television on. Then come the breakups. Marriages fall apart. Children move away. Jobs are lost. The bill comes back in the form of depression, anxiety, panic. And when someone decides to give up on their own life, it's not just an individual tragedy. It's a fissure throughout the city. How many fissures does it take for a neighborhood to crack? For a school to learn to deal with regular mourning? For a church to hold a vigil for names too young? The second risk is political. Without answers, saviors emerge with facile rhetoric. They point fingers, simplify causes, and transform trauma into a banner. They speak loudly and cut funding discreetly. They use the uniform as a backdrop and forget who wore it. They promise safety without mentioning health. They promise strength without mentioning care. And those who are exhausted accept any promise. That offers quick relief. But relief without foundation is like quicksand. The more you move, the deeper you sink. The city enters a cycle of noise, little listening, to many staged gestures. Few public policies that work when the camera turns off. The third risk is geopolitical. Today's wars have long arms and digital fingers if nothing changes. Cyber attacks on hospitals and power grids become more frequent. Drones cross borders without warning. Markets fluctuate with rumors. Countries escalate rhetoric and test limits. The conflict that seemed distant becomes a late-night scare in your neighborhood, a service outage, a rush to the checkout, a price hike on everything. You feel the pressure in your grocery cart, in the bill that arrives, in the company that cuts costs. Are we prepared for such a shock? Or do we continue to believe that distance is a shield? The fourth risk is generational. Children who grow up with alert parents learn to live on alert. They become teenagers with light sleep and impaired attention. They feel guilty for smiling when adults can't. They learn to hide emotions to avoid triggering. Without support, they become adults who repeat the pattern. Fewer bonds, less trust, more defensiveness, more giving up. This is how a war goes on for decades without a shot being fired. You'd call it fate, or a lack of decision. If we know where the social fabric tears, why don't we sew it up now, before the tear becomes a hole? But there are paths that hold tomorrow by the arm. When the city treats mental health as infrastructure, the risk decreases. Care centers with trained staff, responsive service, accessible therapy, peer groups that reframe shame, flexible work programs and mentoring, training leaders who understand symptoms, laws that guarantee continuity of care, partnerships with churches, schools, and neighborhood associations, training neighbors to act without fear or improvisation. None of this is luxury, it's prevention. It's a retaining wall before the flood. It's an investment that returns in fewer hospitalizations, less violence, and more people rebuilding their lives. And then there's diplomacy, which prevents new fires. It's slow and tiring. It demands patience when the public wants a spectacle. It demands giving in when everyone wants to win. Without it, the news is filled with maps with arrows. With it, the arrows slow down. Truce turns into agreement. Agreement becomes routine. Routine becomes minimal trust. Meanwhile, civil society builds points of contact. Projects with veterans in schools. A culture that transforms memory into learning, not a cult of pain. Technology used to care, not just to hurt. You might think it's not enough, but a little consistency, day after day, changes destiny. Those who hold the brink of the abyss are not isolated heroes. They are a collective effort. Let's face the mirror, not as someone seeking solace, but as someone seeking courage. Let's close without closing. Open questions that need to bother us. What is victory when peace doesn't arrive? What is justice when the mind won't sleep? What is patriotism when the family falls apart? Stay, breathe. It's time for the open wound that insists on teaching. The man who returned from war and forgot how to smile continues walking the same streets, nodding to neighbors, trying to exist in a city not designed to hear noises only he hears. You might say that time finds a way, but time alone doesn't solve what we insist on pushing into the shadows. Who holds up the roof when the emotional house is cracked? Who holds the pictures on the wall when the walls tremble inside? The question bothers because it points to us. We are good at paying tribute on set dates. We are terrible at showing up on ordinary Tuesdays. And it is on ordinary Tuesdays that the trauma throbs. Look again at the opening scene. The airport reception, the embrace that doesn't quite reach the body, the eyes that stare without seeing. Now return to the middle ground, the sleepless nights, the packed backpacks, the counted steps, and try to listen to the quietest part of it all. The family, the child who discovers that fireworks don't mean celebration, the wife who learns to say good morning slowly, the father who turns off the television when military propaganda comes on. They don't ask for applause, they ask for instruction, a network, care, a working phone when panic sets in at dawn. It seems small, but that small amount, if it's true and consistent, can restore a piece of life. This is the point at which the audience usually looks for a neat ending. There isn't one. What exists is a path. Sometimes it begins with a simple phrase spoken without posing. I'll stay here. Sometimes it begins with an honest question, something that calms you down. Sometimes it's a gesture, sitting nearby without forcing a conversation, and sometimes it's public policy that takes the pain out of improvisation. Continuous care, therapy that doesn't get stuck in line, work with real adaptation. Training leaders who know how to recognize the signs. It's possible. It's expensive. It's slow. But what is the cost of doing nothing? How many houses need to learn to grieve for a city to change direction? If all this seems distant, bring it closer. It's not someone else's problem. It's a portrait of what we can be. War leaves its mark on those who pull the trigger and those who have never touched a gun. It leaves its mark on the economy, on schools, on hospitals, on the price of bread. It leaves its mark on the words we choose. When we call weakness, what is a wound? When we call courage, what is denial? The language we use can heal or deepen the cut. Ask if it isn't time to trade the hold on rhetoric for let's go together. To abandon the aesthetic of the solitary hero for the practice of shared care. To transform respect into routine, not a slogan. There's a detail that doesn't fit in the headline. The smile may return, may be smaller, may be crooked, may be rare, but it returns when it finds safety. When the hand doesn't need to be always clenched. When the body finally believes. The living room isn't a trench. This return isn't magic. It's the accumulation of small acts. The visit that never fails. The group that welcomes without invasive curiosity. The state that guarantees treatment without humiliating bureaucracy. The company that measures value. Beyond the clock, the neighborhood that becomes a shelter. When this happens, no one wins the war. We just learn not to keep losing. So the wound remains, and the question remains, have we learned anything? Or are we just repeating it all over again with different flags and new justifications? When the next plane lands, when the next man descends, the stairs with a tense face, when another family waits for a smile that doesn't come, what kind of city will we be? The one that offers hurried silence, the one that offers pity, or the one that offers presence? The end of this story doesn't fit in the video. It fits in what you do when the screen goes dark. The choice is here, now, in the size of the step you decide to take closer. Because peace isn't an announcement. Peace is maintenance. And maintenance is done every day.